especially when chronic Hep C with SVR and still cirrhosis. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to thank Roche for supporting my traveling to Myanmar this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anuchit, for your very interesting case scenario with the highlight on the incidence of HCC in a treated patient as well as non-treated patient. But we are running short of time, and the time is, we start a little bit, not a little bit late, but and overshoot around 25 minutes. So I would like to cancel the Q&A section for Dr. Anuchit, but you can ask him, he is around in this area. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for an interesting talk. Before we continue, I would again like to remind you to switch off your mobile phones to vibrating on silent mode. Also, I would like to invite all of you on behalf of the Myanmar GI and Liver Society to the presidential dinner sponsored by Aristo Pharma, which will be held at Sule Shangri-La Ballroom 2 this evening at 7:30 p.m. The second session will be on gastroenterology. May I please invite the chairpersons for this session, Professor Dr. Zole Ao, Professor Dr. Uday Mien, and Professor Dr. U Shui Mien to please take the chair.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm greatly honored to act as the chairperson with my co-chair, Mr. Uday Mien, a session on the GI, and there will be 4 speakers and 4 topics. The first speaker is Professor Thainter. He graduated from University of Rangoon, Myanmar, and he has degrees from United Kingdom and working as Associate Professor, School of Medicine, University of Queensland, Australia. So without further ado, may I invite Professor Thainter to talk about the international collaboration for gastroenterology training.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The title of this talk, of course, is a little different from the scientific discussion of liver disease and gastroenterology, but I'm an Australian gastroenterologist with a special interest in medical education, and because we have also been involved in Myanmar, I thought this was a good venue to share our experience and perhaps our plans for the future. The term collaboration sounds a little political actually, but it's also used for discussions or associations at equal levels. My work presently, as I said, is a general gastroenterologist, but I also have academic affiliations with the University of Queensland and more recently, University of Medicine 1. Now, international collaboration was a term I heard being used by Professor Jim Tooley, who until recently was president of the World Gastroenterology Organization. He used that term to describe perhaps the way the WGO training centers worked all around the world. Each training center has different approaches to medical education or training of doctors and nurses. So he used the term collaboration. At the moment there are 23 WGO training centers, and our group is delighted that we assisted in the establishment of training centers in Suva, Fiji, and more recently in Yangon, Myanmar. Now, as I said, if you are a teacher, you are a little higher than a student, but if you are a trainer, then you are at equal levels, and it is actually collaboration in the broad sense. Now, if you look at any gastroenterology unit or service around the world, you can look at it as an equilateral triangle because there are the doctors, there are the nurses, and there are the updated equipment, mainly endoscopy equipment, that is used day in and day out to provide assistance with our diagnostic and therapeutic work. So any approach to training or teaching would need to address all 3 points of this equilateral triangle. So what can the training program do? Now, these thoughts that I'm sharing with you are something that are really not set in stone, but in the process of our discussions among ourselves in Australia and New Zealand, these are what we thought should assist with planning for training programs. Of course, we have people on workshops, short visits, study tours, and you invite local consultants to tertiary centers for training. But something that we plan for here is, of course, an ongoing process with regular visits and regular training, so that it's part of a main training program of any host hospital or host university. The program has to be geared to the work or the routine or the workload of the host country or hospital or department, and it should, of course, target not only the doctors but also the nurses, because the nurses are an integral part of the gastroenterology service. Now, I emphasize this because I will, in this talk, show how much we would like to support nurses in the host departments. So there should also be, of course, practical training, not just on the theoretical clinical aspects, but the administration of an endoscopy unit. So Professor Finlay Macrae, who instigated this in 2007, hunted round for people who had like interest like him. And we started discussions in 2007. By 2008, we had established links with the Fiji National University, and we set up an initial program to Fiji, and this was eventually recognized as the Suva Training Center by the WGO in October 2008. Our group also has had several name changes now. We are called ANZGITA, ANZGITA. That's the acronym for Australian and New Zealand Gastroenterology International Training Association. So international, there's an association, there's a link with Australia and New Zealand teachers. Now we have teachers, doctors and nurses who have gone on these trips from all the states in Australia and also from Canberra in the Australian Capital Territory. Now, what I'll do next is I'll show you some of the work we have done. It's always a work in process because it depends on the host country or the host department and how we try to improve and our current work also. Now, we are now linked with GENSA, G-E-N-C-A. GENSA is the Gastroenterological Nurses College of Australia, a very, very active group of nurses who are dedicated to endoscopy nursing, starting with administration of endoscopy units, everything, ordering items, looking after equipment, assisting or working with doctors. So they have formal training programs. There are bachelors of nursing and of course training in endoscopy in the units. So we are now linked with GENSA, and the two nurses who initially visited Fiji in 2009 were Kathy Conway, who is the current president of GENSA, and Di Jones, who is the current president of SIGNIA. SIGNIA is the Society for International Gastroenterological and Endoscopy Nursing Associates. So it's an international organization called SIGNIA. So we're linked with GENSA and SIGNIA. So currently these are the principles of the program we are following. So the training should be provided in the host country because we don't want to take a group of doctors and nurses to Australia and New Zealand because some may not return or some may get too interested. That's called a brain drain. All the design, all the planning is left to the local organizers, the local team, and we will link with them, and there will be numerous emails back and forth all the time. It's a transfer of skills and knowledge, not a service delivery program. It also addresses the need of the region or the country. The assistance is pro bono. That means all the doctors and nurses come free of charge, voluntary, and the age groups of the doctors and nurses coming across would be a very broad age group, like people very afraid like myself, and of course a younger group, so that there's a continual sort of expertise and turnover. And so the cohort of teachers grows larger and larger. And we always emphasize again how important GI endoscopy nurses are for this program. We have, of course, we keep revising the checklist, and this is something that we have to work all the time between the host department. The host department provides the titles of the topics. We have back and forth discussions about who should give the talks, and STIDA recruits the teachers in Australia and New Zealand. There are also problems sometimes with visas, registration with medical councils, insurance and indemnity, funding also. Now, the funding here is interesting because we try to get funding for the nurses who visit all the time. In Australia, in the past 5 years, there have been 4 different prime ministers. So even a New Zealand prime minister says he doesn't know who the Australian prime minister is this month. So the policies changes so much, and presently the funding has been reduced quite substantially for foreign assistance. Apologies. We have 3 current training programs ongoing, formal ones. One, as I said, the original one in Suva. There's one in Honiara in the Solomon Islands, and the current one that we are presently running a course in Yangon here. Now, I'll just go over each and the approach we have for each of these programs, because the country and the basic health needs are absolutely different. This is actually from Suva. This picture is from Suva. It actually shows the various places we have actually covered also, and in fact it also includes the old name for Burma in this little signpost. Now we'll start with Fiji. The population of Fiji is well under 1 million in total actually. The capital population is only 75,000, and the teaching hospital is called the Colonial War Memorial Hospital. It's very colonial, from the British colonial days. It was set up in 1914, makes it about the same age as the Yangon General Hospital. So it's the main teaching hospital, and university in the Fiji National School of Medicine, Fiji National University, a very well-established medical school. Medium of instruction is English. Now our link is with the Suva Training Center, or the WGO Training Center established there. So the work there is a little different from here. They have the medical students and the postgraduate students come from all the small islands around in the South Pacific. I'll show you a map shortly. And they are all, if they are a physician or a surgeon, they do all the medical or the surgical needs of those small islands, where the population usually well under 100,000, so they might be the only doctor on that island. So the instruction is for gastroenterology is in a 1-month module. We know that the timing of the module is in July, August, so at the moment a group of doctors and nurses spend a total of 1 month in July, August teaching gastroenterology, endoscopy, and also endoscopic nursing. So there's some spend 2 weeks, some spend 4 weeks, but there's a program, and in fact we've recruited all the doctors and nurses for this year's program in Fiji. We use the term endoscopy training in totality. That means overall, as I mentioned earlier, and as I mentioned just now, the funding is very erratic at the moment from the Australian government. This is the map of the South Pacific. Now, Papua New Guinea has an established medical school. Fiji is here, and all the other medical students and doctors come from these little islands to Fiji or to PNG, and the teachers come from Australia and New Zealand. So it's a very widespread geographical area, so the needs are entirely different. This is the island, the nation of Fiji, and as I said, the main medical school is at the Fiji National University. These are from the old days, about 7-8 years ago, when the first or the second group came. Just as an example, Daniel Worthy is from Brisbane. Jody Malani, who would be very comfortable here in his national dress, is the main contact physician who runs all the programs for us. Kathy Conway is the current president of GenSet. This is Professor Ian Roberts Thompson from Adelaide and Associate Professor Tony Clark from Canberra. Obviously, they are dressed very formally by Australian standards. This is the Fiji National University, and it's all been updated. This is the Colonial War Memorial Hospital, which has also been updated with very nice wards and all the usual trolleys that nurses do. And this is a meeting room or lecture area where the medical students, doctors and nurses have clinical meetings like in any other teaching hospital. This is a very well updated lecture hall in the Fiji National University. This picture was from 2007, 2008, when it was a surprise for someone to discover a duodenal ulcer on endoscopy. But things have changed since then, and this is a more recent picture. This doctor doing the scope is a general physician called Dr. Mei Ling Berman. She's actually from the Marshall Islands, but because she's become highly competent in endoscopy, she has spent some time in and around Melbourne, updating her skills in Melbourne, Victoria. So these would be a group of Fijian and Pacific Island medical students and doctors. Now things are updated now. Here's a